Good evening, everyone. Tonight is March 8th, 2013. My name is Matthew Ogden, and I'm welcoming you to our regular Friday night international live broadcast from LarouchePack.com. Tonight's broadcast will feature, as always, Mr. Lyndon Larouche. We're also joined in the studio by Jason Ross and Leandra Bernstein. So without further introduction, I give you Mr. Larouche.
Well, as you've noticed, there have been some changes in the structure of the U.S. Congress. They have not been formally defined, but they are coming on rapidly. What is happening now is obvious, is that the Congress, as we have known it, as an institution for a long period of time, is now finished. We see that in the multi-phase arrangement among nominal Republicans, which is becoming quite a complicated business to keep track of, and Democrats and so forth. So there is no real coherence to the Congress in the manner that there has been before. Now, that's not peak. There may be a lot of peak going back and forth in this process, but the issue is not peak. The issue is money. Because you're in a situation in which unless we get a Glass-Steagall bill through quick, the United States as a nation is going to disintegrate. This process of hyperinflation and all the fakery that Obama is doing and so forth cannot avoid that. The United States is already bankrupt. And there's only one way to fix it. There is no other. Glass-Steagall. And Glass-Steagall the way we've defined it. What Obama is doing and the rest of them are doing are simply skating on thinner and thinner ice. And it's not in the wintertime. It's in the summertime. And that's where we are. So there's no way in which the present monetary system of the United States can continue to exist under its present policies. There is only one way in which the United States can avoid going into total bankruptcy, and I mean disintegration. And that is Glass-Steagall as we have defined it for action. Now, you see the signs of this. For example, all this withholding of funds is simply fakery. What they're doing is simply speeding up the hyperinflation. Now, if you talk about Germany back in 1923, you've got a fair idea of what kind of business we're talking about. This country is bankrupt. This nation is bankrupt. This presidency is bankrupt. This Congress is bankrupt. And there's only one way you can get it out of bankruptcy. Glass-Steagall. Why? Well, the point is how can you, by just Glass-Steagall, get out of bankruptcy? Well, it's not too difficult. If your head is screwed on properly, you can understand this. The point is that most of the money which has been run through, especially since Obama came into the presidency, but also from the Bush League before then, that what they were doing and what they have been doing for a period of time is nothing but gambling. And they keep losing at the table. And so therefore, what you need is you can't say we have money, because money is now a dirty word. It doesn't mean anything. The fact that you've got money, when you look at the reputation of what our financial institutions are, they have a lot of money on their books, but there's nothing worth anything there. So we have to go back to honest money, in a sense. I wouldn't use the term otherwise, except to annoy some people who need being annoyed very seriously. But what we have to do immediately, we have to put through Glass-Steagall as an emergency action now. What's happening now, if that does not happen, this system is going to blow out. It's already in a state of hyperinflation. You have a similar situation in Europe. It's a Greek situation, hyperinflation. Spain, hyperinflation. Portugal, hyperinflation. Italy, hyperinflation. Germany on the edge. France on the edge. It's over. It's over. Obviously, some people are waiting for something else. Now, one of the things they're waiting for is war. See, in other words, this system, the way it's organized, the transatlantic system, the U.S. system included, cannot possibly survive under these conditions without some very clear change. And you've got two likely options. Option number one is Glass-Steagall. Option number two is World War III, thermonuclear war. Because there's no way. Obama is the most worthless president who ever existed from any nation in the history of mankind. The most bankrupt man in the history of statecraft. There's nothing you can do about it. This thing is hopeless. It's not worth anything. It doesn't translate into food. It doesn't translate into health care. It doesn't translate into anything that has any value. It's simply hyperinflationary, make-believe money. And obviously the game is, well, the game has a policy to it. Let me just get to the really dirty part about that. What is going on? Why is the British monarchy controlling the President of the United States in the way they're doing? Because he's nothing but a puppet of the British monarchy. That's all he is. So what's he up to? Well, let's look to Great Britain. You had back in, we had a Danish campaign that didn't work out too well for the British. And the result of that was that the Queen came on with a program for reduction of the human population. That is the reduction of the human species from 7 billion people estimated to a rapid descent into approximately 1 trillion people. That is the policy of the Queen. Those are the policies of cut, which you're seeing in the United States and elsewhere. This is what you're seeing it took at the price of food. Why is the price of food so high? Because the value of the dollar is so low. It's that simple. Now, if we go to Glass-Steagall, that means what we do is we take all that money that's classified as money, in the one sense, but ain't. In other words, the assumption is on the basis of money that money can have a stable value, and therefore that your purpose is you can get a lot of money, but you've got to match it with things that people consume, or investments and things of that sort. Physical investments. You've got to turn the money into something which is useful to society. And there's nothing of that there. This has been coming on step by step for a long time, since the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which is when the turn came in this direction. But then, once Bill Clinton was out of office, then things began to accelerate. And now the United States is bankrupt. At the same time, the system of government, of the congressional system, is also disintegrating. And that is one of the healthiest things that's happening. I mean, you have Republicans that are no longer Republicans. You've got 2 or 3 varieties of these. Same thing as the Democrats. The Democrats aren't that yet obvious, but they will be very soon. So we're in a situation where this system has no value. And people out there who are telling you about the money they have, the savings they have, the credit they have, the value of the property that they say they have, it's all bunk. There is no such value. It's only paper waste money. It's not even exchangeable. There's no attempt to exchange it. They just keep piling it on and counting more digits in the figure. So as of now, anybody today who thinks that any of these party systems have anything that's competent, under which this United States can survive, they have to be nuts or almost stone dead foolish, because there's nothing for them here. But on the other hand, there's something we can have. We can have it under our Constitution. Glass-Steagall means that all the money that doesn't fit reality simply is not counted. We bring the accounts into balance under a Glass-Steagall reform. And all the money that doesn't fit in those shoes is not counted anymore. Now that means a lot of so-called wealthy people are going to get suddenly very broke. But that's only the rest of us have been through that long enough anyway. We're not going to worry about them. We have to worry about getting people productively employed, about their income, their nourishment, their health care, and other real things. We can do that under Glass-Steagall. But we've got to get Glass-Steagall rammed through early before the actual full fall crash occurs. Otherwise, you, whoever you are out there, don't have nothing unless you get Glass-Steagall now. There's no way you can have anything if they don't give you Glass-Steagall now. Now, I'm an expert in this matter, as a lot of our people in the Congress are not. Certainly the President is not competent in this question either. But we can do it. All it takes is the kind of action that Franklin Roosevelt took in 1932-33. That action will say, but it has to be on the basis of a Glass-Steagall plan. And a Glass-Steagall plan, under that basis, under that kind of reform, we can. Because once we get rid of this garbage, which we just simply ignore, because it has no value whatsoever, it can't be traded for anything, it's not worth anything. So the U.S. government will then have to create a credit system in which we will extend credit for employment, for purchases, things of that sort that are real. The objective is to get more people back to work, and real incomes. And we can do that. The government of the United States, under our Constitution, has the ability to organize such measures. And the time has come, we can no longer operate on the basis of ignoring the fact that we have to do that. And what that has done. That reality has caught up with the members of the Congress, the Senate in particular. The Democrats also. They're faced now with a reality neither of them can do anything competently because they don't have a system that allows them to do it. All they would have to do is have Glass-Steagall enacted as law, and I can tell you we have the means to organize exactly what has to be done to save this nation and to save the people in it. You sit around and say, well, the Democrats this and the Republicans that. Well, the Republicans don't really exist anymore. There are many varieties. There's like Heinz's many varieties of Republicans and Democrats alike. The Democrats are going to get sorted out too. And we've seen that in the results of the recent period. So we're at a point, we've got one thing to do. If you want you to be alive, if you want your neighbors to be alive, if you want this economy to exist, you, as a citizen, now must commit yourself now to force through Glass-Steagall immediately, together with an included credit system facility built into it. We will then be creating the jobs needed, productive jobs, generally, which people need as places to work and sources of income. We can do it. We did it. It was a hard job done in the 1930s, 1933 on, a very hard job to get our people out of real stark poverty. And I saw it then. I've seen it. I know what that looks like. And what we're looking at now is much worse than you would see in the Depression. That's where we're at. So the time has come, we have to make a decision. You're going to make a decision among politicians? No. You're going to make a decision about whether you want to live or not, whether you want the nation to exist or not. And there's only one thing within the framework of our Constitution which will let us in the United States do the things quickly, which we must do quickly, to bring this nation out of the threat of its own destruction. Anything else, you're talking about something else, you're one of the nitwits.
Thank you very much. If you're just tuning in, you're watching a live webcast with Mr. Lyndon Larouche. Mr. Larouche has finished his opening remarks, and I would like to ask Jason Ross to please come to the podium.
Well, we had a pretty good example of actually standing up on principle this week, as opposed to the partisan peak that you were contrasting that to, with the frankly exciting filibuster made by Senator Paul about John Brennan's nomination to be director of the CIA. This has really caused quite a commotion. The cover story on the New York Times is Senate filibusters scrambles, both left and right. While Senator Paul was having this filibuster, while he had support from mostly Republicans, but a Democratic senator as well, other factions of the Republican Party were enjoying a incredibly fancy lobster dinner with President Obama, and later some of them rather snottily chided Rand Paul for standing up for the right of due process. So it bore fruit. The next day, Attorney General Holder wrote a letter to Senator Paul, and his letter said, because Paul's point was, he said it's a simple question. Why has the administration not answered this simple question? Is it legal for the president to kill an American on American soil? And that should be a simple question. The answer is no. But that answer was not coming from the administration. In fact, Holder had said, we haven't done it before, it's unlikely to occur, there might be a situation where we'd have to think about it, and we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. That's not a no. After this filibuster, Attorney General Holder wrote a letter. He said, Dear Senator Paul, it has come to my attention that you have now asked an additional question. Does the president have the authority to use a weaponized drone to kill an American not engaged in combat on American soil? The answer to that question is no. Finally. So this is very important. It's a very important victory for the fact that we don't have a dictatorship in this country, for the power of the legislature. We have a system of due process in this country. And it's important not just in you might say it's a small victory to say, well, we can't be killed by a drone any day. But more broadly, it's very important because this, I think, is the first time the Obama administration has recognized that there's anything that it cannot do. This is a new step. So let me, I'm going to have to read a quote here. This is one quote that from Paul's filibuster. And it gets at what you brought up just now about hyperinflation. He said that, this is Senator Paul, he said, when World War II ended, the currency was being destroyed in Germany in 1923 because the paper money became so worthless that people wheeled it around in wheelbarrows. They burned it for fuel. It became virtually worthless overnight. The beginning of September 23, I think it was 10 or 15 marks for a loaf of bread. By September 14th, it was 1,000 marks. September 30th, 100,000 marks. October 15th, a couple of million marks for a loaf of bread. It was a chaotic situation. Out of that chaos, Hitler was elected, democratically. They elected him out of this chaos. The point isn't that anybody in our country is Hitler. I am not accusing anybody of being that evil. It's an analogy. It's a misused analogy. In a democracy, you could someday elect somebody who is very evil. And that's why we don't give the power to the government. It's a point to be made historically that occasionally even a democracy gets it wrong. So when a democracy gets it wrong, you want the law to be there in its place. You want the rule of law. So let me ask you a question that comes from a D.C. source. The question is, Mr. Larouche, now that the issue of presidential violations of the balance of power has come into more prominence through the bipartisan filibuster led by Senator Rand Paul, along with Democratic Senator Ron Wyden and others, what additional measures could the legislature take to further this balance of power? I believe that the filibuster debate shook the landscape for the White House to a certain extent, and significantly put the issue of the executive's violations of the balance of power into national prominence, even though it did not resolve the issue. Could you give your assessment of this?
Yeah. Well, you have to go back in the history of the United States a bit in order to see exactly clearly how our system works when it does work. What we had for much of our system, we've had a system of congressional rule, congressional party rule. And it was a question of a fight between two parties, both for the majority position, or not just the two parties, but all the multi-party system itself. And that was the way we ran. So we never had we didn't have, after particularly Andrew Jackson was brought into power, we did not have, except for very rare intervals, we never had a system based on our Constitution. And because the party system got in the way, the party system became a substitute, and therefore the question of who had the majority of the party votes was the key issue. And now we've come to a point where that has broken down. It's crumbled during this lobbying period in the Congress. So the point is now that that condition exists, glory, hallelujah. We don't have a majority party system anymore. We have a system which is fragmented of people who may be Republicans, they may call themselves Democrats, that's their choice in running for office and occupying office, but we don't have a party taking over the authorities of the federal government to determine by adjustment of the party system to use that as a way of controlling the policy of the government. Now this under Andrew Jackson and what followed, up until the actual Civil War, that kind of corruption ruled. And actually the U.S. government was, in that period, was run from New York City, and to some degree Boston, by British bankers. So the British bankers who funded the campaigns of the candidates, or controlled the funding of those candidates, by manipulating the candidacy system, were able to have a majority rule system, or the equivalent, or a plurality system of rule. And therefore we did not have we want to call it a democratic system. Well, you had the democratic system we had in ancient Athens was also not so good. So the point now we've got a bunch of people who come from various varieties and flavors of Democrats, Republicans, and who knows what else. And that's good. That's good, because that means they can no longer have party rule controlling the federal government. We should never have had it. If you have it on the basis of belief, on issue, on so forth, that's fine. If it works out that way on merits, but if it works out as a scheme to line up people to vote to constitute a majority for somebody's interest, that's a fake, and that's what we've been living under for too long. Look, that's what's happened with, for example, with the cases of President Franklin Roosevelt. He was put in a position on his campaign for a fourth term in which they pulled a mug in on him. Truman. So you had a majority that came in on the last term, and that majority turned a great achievement of the United States under President Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, into a disaster. The last years of President Roosevelt's life were lived with the curse of Truman. If you look at the measures, the policies that Franklin Roosevelt had installed up to that point, the agreements he'd reached, the post-war intentions which he had established. Now look at the record. What happened between the time that he left office and came into a fourth term and was elected into a fourth term, but on what conditions and what were the results? Under the Truman administration, you saw the full right. This was a disaster, and we never recovered from that disaster. We did recover in a sense under John F. Kennedy, but they killed him, and we never had an honest party system after that. Now we have the Republican Party is now, in a sense, fragmented in terms of its views on hard issues. The Democratic Party is going to go through the same process, slowed down by the factor of Obama. But the Obama thing is going to backfire against the Democrats too. So now we've come to the point we have to get rid of that kind of party system. People can choose their parties that they want to affiliate with. But the idea of operating on the basis of control of the United States policy by a party system, that must come to an end. And what Rand Paul did in his particular action went a long way, as of now, towards setting the end of the party system into motion. People can still have political parties, but the idea of a rule by party majority, that has to come to an end.
Before I ask Leandra to come to the podium, I just want to underscore what you just said, because this is very significant. Not only on the floor of the Senate did you have over a dozen members of the United States Senate come to join Rand Paul in his filibuster, his 13-hour filibuster, which he himself said he didn't expect. He didn't think that there were going to be other members of the Senate that would join him there, and this was completely unexpected. But some of the members of the Senate that came included Senator Ron Wyden, who is a Democrat, but is putting up a fight against the Obama administration's dictatorship. And Senator Wyden today was interviewed, and he said, look, there's a new nonpartisan movement sweeping this country, which is to fight against the violations by this president of the U.S. Constitution and to defend it. And also you had Mitch McConnell show up, the leadership, so-called, of the Republican Party, showed up and vocally stood there on the floor of the Senate and supported Rand Paul's filibuster and said that he would vote against Brennan together with Rand Paul, despite the fact that Harry Reid, the leader of the Democratic Party, came to shut it down, and he was ignored. Rand Paul said, "I will not yield the floor." Now, the other thing that I think is just very important is the factor of the acknowledgement that this is, these senators realized that they were standing on the stage of history, and it brought out the best of them all, despite anything else. Very significantly, you had Senator Ted Cruz, a freshman senator from Texas, reciting the monologue from Henry V that he delivers on the eve of the Battle of Agincourt, St. Crispin's Eve, saying, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers," and the acknowledgement that even if the majority is going along with the violation of the U.S. Constitution, there will be a handful of those who stand on principle and are willing to fight for this. So I think that the period of history that we're in, and everything that you have been saying really since your 90th anniversary address, that it's time to your 90th birthday address, that it's time to destroy and break this party rule, this party system. We really are at a profound moment in history, and I think the profound drama of this historical moment really can sink in for people. Now, the question is, how do we escalate? And I would like to ask Leandra Bernstein to come to the podium to pose a question on this subject.
I think I'll lower the microphone from both of you speaking to escalate, but I would like to raise a question that was absent from the 13-hour filibuster. There were glimmers of a potentially groundbreaking issue coming to the floor of the Senate, yet it was not brought up. During the course of the drone debate, there has been a lot of discussion about the September 2001 authorization for use of military force. That was the authorization that Congress gave to the president on September 14th after the 9/11 attacks. I'll just read it here. Authorizing the president to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred September 11th, 2001, or who harbored such organizations or persons in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, and so on. Now, this is what was used in the 16-page drone memo to basically authorize the president through solely executive organizations who carry out, like the JSOC organization, the CIA, to carry out these drone killings, was done under the auspices of this congressional authorization. So when that came up in the drone discussion, it really brings us back to the original 9/11 attacks and what was intended to come as a result of those attacks. And I'll note, recently there has been, we've discussed it here before, there has been a call to repeal the authorization for use of military force, and that's something, the 2001 Act, and that's something that should go straight ahead. But what would get to the heart of the matter is to really uncover what happened on that day. What forces were at play on September 11th, 2001? And what we know from the work of former Senator Bob Graham of Florida, who was the head of the 9/11 Commission, we know that there were 28 pages of that report, which the White House, the Bush White House, essentially deemed unfit to print, not because it was not because of issues of national security, but because of the political implications. And we know without any doubt that those 28 pages in that 9/11 report go directly at the Saudi government, the Saudi monarchy's involvement in the financing of the 9/11 attacks. And so I'd like you to say what you can. I mean, it's also useful that Representative Walter Jones has issued a statement calling for the release of these 28 pages, but also significant as well that Barack Obama's recently appointed CIA director, John Brennan, was orchestral in blocking Barack Obama's release of the 28 pages, which was demanded of him when he first came into office, and it was Brennan himself who worked to prevent that material from coming to light. So if you could remark on this situation as an escalation of the now out in the open fight against the drone war, to get at this matter.
Yes. Yes, I do have a certain amount of knowledge in this matter. and quite apart from these hidden, suppressed documents. We know that the 9/11 operation, as it's been called, was organized by a trio of agencies: the British monarchy, the BAE military institution, and the Saudi government. That we also know that we know of some of the pilots. Also, we know that the ambassador of Saudi Arabia to the United States was involved in organizing the funding of the pilots who participated in those attacks. So and we also know that the Bush administration knew that this was the case, because it was the Bush administration that organized the safe exit of those Saudi families which were tied to that part of the Saudi business in the United States. You had the whole nation was shut down at that point. No one could fly in or out except the Saudis, who were escorted out from Texas and other places where they've been treated, meeting with the Bush family, for example. So this whole operation then was entirely that. But what's the significance? The significance is very simple. Who could get the United States, which had just suffered a major attack from Saudi and British forces who were involved in this, because the British institutions, the BAE, and the Saudi institutions were all part of this operation. And so who could do that? We know exactly who did it. It was done by the British monarchy. The British monarchy set the whole thing up. That's the guilty party, and that's what the cover-up's all about. Now, I think the very simple thing is, I think this British monarchy should, shall we say, be restrained. Now, what is the British monarchy's policy now? You had, there was a campaign for green issues centered in Denmark. What happened? Well, the Queen was very upset, but she made her point of view very clear. Her intention, and this is clear, her intention has been to reduce the present population of the planet from approximately 7 billion people to the order of approximately 1. That is the green policy of the British monarchy, and that is most of the other things that are occurring here in the United States are the same thing. Why are the American people stripped of a food supply? Why did Monsanto and other companies, so forth, involve themselves with the federal government in cutting down the food supply of the United States? Who is starving the people of the United States? The same interests. The British Empire interests. They are the ones who are responsible. They are responsible, for the kind of warfare that's going on these issues now. And what we have is we have people in the United States in high positions of government, in high positions of politics, and of business interests, of banking interests, of the kind that have been swallowed everything up. That's where the enemy lies. And the point is, the United States has been betrayed by its own government, knowledgeably. Don't you think that they know what this thing is? Don't you think this is known? How can you suppress something without knowing what it is you're suppressing? Now, this is the great crime. This is a great treason by all of those officials of government of the United States who were complicit in the cover-up. The evidence was there. Why then, if the evidence is not there, why don't they just publish it, the 28 pages? Why don't they? Because they're covering it up. Because they're working for a foreign power against the people of the United States. That's the truth of the matter. And for the people of the United States, realize what's been done to them. They will demand relief from the kind of crap they've had been put through all these years, especially since 2001.
Well, in the views of some, relief is right around the corner. This week, we saw the Dow reach a record level. And this is causing euphoria among some people. In fact, if recent history is a reliable guide, this means that we've turned the corner, we've rounded the bend, the recession is in its final throes, and we will soon give way to a complete collapse of the economy. Compare the economy right now to October 2007, which is a time you might remember right before a major economic collapse. The other thing that happened in October 2007 is the Dow reached a record high. In fact, almost exactly the same value that it reached this week. Let's just compare what things were like then, so we can show that the recession's turning around. In 2007, gas cost $2.75. Today it's $3.73. Unemployment of people in the labor force, not even including labor force dropouts, unemployment of people in the labor force was 6.7 million then. It's now doubled to 13.2. The number of Americans on food stamps, 27 million at the last peak of the Dow. Today, 48 million. The Fed's balance sheet, under 1 trillion then, over 3 trillion now. Debt as a percentage of our GDP, 38% in 2007. Today, doubling to 74%. Total U.S. debt, 9 trillion in 2007, 16.4 trillion today. So if anybody's thinking that the Dow's high right now means that everything's turning around, things are looking good right now, I mean, if anybody could even think that, then I don't know if they would have been able to get through as much of this program as to be able to see this question, but it'd be a very foolish way of thinking. Now, compare this to some other funding figures. I just earlier this week got a tour of the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, where they're doing some really exciting work on plasma for the purpose of creating fusion. The ITER project, the International Fusion Project being built in France, it's a project that costs somewhere between $16 to $17 billion over the 10-year construction project. It's expected to be online in 2018. This project, the U.S., one of the 7 nations participating in building it, is contributing $45 million a year for a $16 to $17 billion project. At the Princeton Physics Lab, they're working on a new design for a stellarator, which is a different approach to fusion than the tokamaks that are typically used. It works more with the dynamics of the plasma. They've built the parts. They need to assemble them and put them in a space with power supplies and diagnostics equipment. That would cost 40 to 45 million. After they built the parts, they found out they couldn't get the funding to put them together, which would be about 45 million. Now compare this to a much lower form of technology that does get financing. How much money was lost on Cylindra, which studied the incredibly new design of using sunlight to create electricity? 500 million. Okay, 10 times the total amount that the U.S. is going to contribute to this new fusion design in France. That's how much was lost just on Cylindra, to say nothing of the amount that we're wasting every year on solar panels, on windmills, which, like I've said, they were a good breakthrough a few centuries ago, but not anymore. It's, it'd be like saying, oh, a horse and buggy is a great idea. Now, okay, so let me ask you about this. So if you compare the enthusiasm over the Dow going up to the state of the real economy, it's like there's 2 completely different worlds being described here. So let me ask you, if we're not supposed to look at the stock markets as an economic indicator, what would be useful indicators of economic growth? What are we trying to create? What are we looking to see?
We're trying to essentially increase the productive powers of labor. That's the simple code word for the whole process, which means you want to increase the energy flux density. That is, it means the power, the concentration of power that you use for production and for everything else. You increase that. As a matter of fact, if you look at the history of all living processes, insofar as we know them, long before the history of mankind began. We find that there's a steady growth of energy flux density in the succession of varieties of species both in the plant life and in animal life and in human life. So the essential requirement for success of life on this planet, whether in plant life, in animal life, or human beings, is always the increase of energy flux density, going to higher concentrations of power. This not only occurs in that form, it occurs also in the biological form. The species are improved in their ability to concentrate their effects. So therefore, what is being done now in the name of the green policy is directly opposed to the history of life in general. What is this all about? Well, back to the Queen. The Queen said her intention is that in the relatively short period of time, this came out of the Copenhagen proceeding and so forth, that the population of the planet must be reduced from 7 billion people to about 1. And that's the intention. The same intention is the green policy. The green policy is a mass human murder policy. And people who are supporting it are actually murderers, whether they understand what murder is or not. So therefore, if humanity is going to continue to exist, we're going to recognize that the Queen and her policies are a policy for genocide against the human species. For example, you talk about 7 billion people. In China, you're talking about what? 1.4 or so billion people. India, more than 1.1 billion people. So you're talking about sweeping wipeouts of entire parts of the human species. The wipeout method is to reduce the productive powers of labor, to lower the energy flux density. The policy of the Queen, the policy of Her Great Majesty, the Queen, is mass murder of the human population. And that is perfectly consistent with 9/11, number 1, and number 2. That's the intention of this president we have. That's his policy. His policy is a policy of genocide. Well, you say, does he say he's going to commit genocide? No, he doesn't have to say that. He has to give the orders that cause the genocide to occur. So therefore, we're at a point that there have got to be some big changes made very fast now. Because, I don't think Satan is quite as evil as this Queen has been.
Well, it's good to know that the Queen doesn't have competition with Satan. Now, on this subject, there is a question that came in on the strategic situation, mainly relations between the United States and Russia. And we will be putting out a video on the Larouche PAC site very soon on some of the bluffing on the part of the Obama administration, but then a very serious response from the Russians to the threat of a potential World War III, thermonuclear World War III. For example, there was a recent article in the Moscow Times by Vladimir Kozin, a researcher at the Russian Institute of Strategic Studies and a member of the Putin presidential administration. And what he indicated is that the missile defense system that the United States is putting up surrounding Russia obviously has no other target, not Iran, not North Korea. It has no other target than Russia. He said the the only purpose of the U.S. missile defense equipment deployed in Europe is to destroy Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles. The fact that our country is never mentioned in the Missile Shield program as a potential participant proves that it is aimed at Russia. Moreover, there was an incredible blustering out of the journal of the U.S. Air Force Air University. It was written by a few academics, basically arguing that the era of mutually assured destruction was entirely over because of technological advances made in U.S. nuclear deterrence that would make a U.S. first strike so devastating that no nation could launch a second strike, that we could disarm our adversary entirely by destroying their nuclear weapons. Now, it's coincidental that a number of days after this was published and got some circulation, Joe Biden was giving a statement, a statement to AIPAC on the issue of where the Obama administration stands on Iran developing nuclear weapons. And Joe Biden's statement was, "The President of the United States cannot and does not bluff." So it's well, maybe not entirely directly related, certainly an interesting coincidence. Now, to get to the question from this an official in Washington, D.C., also this week, the new Secretary of State, John Kerry, announced $60 million in aid to go to Syrian rebel groups. And I have to say, if you're a Syrian rebel, if you're a member of Al-Qaeda, you really have to start hedging your bets. I mean, on the one hand, John Brennan, Barack Obama destroy you with a drone on any given day, but on the other hand, John Kerry might just give you $60 million. So I mean, I shouldn't make light of that, given the seriousness of the situation. But to get to the question, there are two sharply different views towards relations with Russia. On the one hand, the recent meteor and asteroid events have sharpened some thinking in the United States for greater cooperation between the U.S. and Russia, especially in the direction of the strategic defense of Earth. But the White House's further support for Syrian rebels and its policy on ballistic missile defense continue to be provocative toward Russia. What, in your assessment, could be done to encourage more communication that could reduce the tension between the U.S. and Russia?
Well, you have to understand that as long as the Queen is the Queen of England, and as long as her lackeys are her lackeys, including Obama lackey, then they are going to act like lackeys, the lackeys they are. So the point is of trying to deal with these guys, to essentially you're going to bargain with them. You're not going to bargain with them. You're going to take them at their word and act accordingly. You're going to act accordingly. If they won't do what they should do, you will have to do what you should do. That's the situation that's created. You're talking about 1.4 billion people in China. They're targeted. That's what they're talking about. 1.1 to 1.2 in India. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about getting down to about 1 billion people in this planet fast. And it's only if we can awaken the American people in particular to the reality of what these bums are that they think are their presidents, you're going to have a bloody thermonuclear war. You're at a point where you have the British monarchy, which is controlling this president. This president is nothing but a stooge for the British monarchy. That's what he is. He really has no loyalty to the United States. So I don't know why we worry about his being a president. He has no loyalty to the United States. He has no loyalty to the American people. The point is, this thing has to be crushed. And if the United States won't do it, since we apparently have some of this power, then somebody's going to do it to us. We have never been in greater danger of general warfare than we are at this period. And there is no solution to this threat unless you bring Obama out of power. And the Queen, too. But the Queen couldn't do anything much on this level without control of the United States. So we got to take the power of the United States out of the hands of this president. Because he's a criminal. He doesn't have any, automatic great power. His power is limited to the fact that he honors his obligation as president and performs the function properly. If he's taking off on some other intention, then he's a traitor to the United States. That's where we are. We have people who are submitting to all kinds of abuses. They're out there, they're starving. They're being destroyed. Their children are being destroyed. The whole culture of the United States is being destroyed. And we're sitting here and allowing that to happen to our people? What kind of leaders do we have that allow that? Well, you know what I think about John Kerry. I'm not going to tell you, but I'll let you guess. Because I once called upon by Clinton to jump in and try to support this guy in his campaign for president. I regret that deeply as of now. But the point is, we're in that situation. We're now threatened by this kind of situation. And therefore, we either act as we should act, given the facts, or we know where we're going to go, and it ain't good.
Well, I want to thank you, Lynn. That's the conclusion for our webcast tonight, but there's a lot that we have on our plate. A lot is going to change between now and next Friday, as I think we've all now retrospectively looking at the past week between last Friday and today, we can realize that's the kind of period that we're in. So that brings a conclusion to our webcast tonight. I'd like to thank Lynn, thank Jason, thank Leandra, and thank you all for watching. Good night.